They say the forest breathes at night. It doesn't just stand there with its black trunks and whispering. They say the forest is alive, not just with animals and wind, but with something older, something that waits. At night the trees seem to lean closer, and every sound carries too far, like whispers chasing you. Hunters and travelers tell stories about footsteps that follow when no one is there, about campsites where firewood is found neatly stacked though no one touched it, about dogs that howl and refuse to go further. Once, a man vanished only a few steps from his friends. They heard him cry out, then silence, and when they searched, his tracks ended in the middle of untouched snow. Another time, a woman swore she saw lights moving deep in the pines, like lanterns, but when she followed, the ground opened under her and she barely escaped the bog that smelled of rot. The scariest tale is of those who stayed too long. People who tried to fight the darkness with laughter or song, only to wake up with strange marks on their skin, as if fingers had gripped them in the night. The forest does not shout its secrets, it whispers them, slowly, until you realize it's not the beasts you should fear, but the silence that comes when even the beasts have fled. Deep in the north, where winters last longer than memory and the trees stand older than villages, there is a forest people do not name after dark. In the daylight it seems harmless, tall pines dripping with frost, rivers frozen into glass, snow that swallows sound. But when the sun falls, everything shifts. The branches creak like doors opening, the wind carries voices that do not belong to men, and shadows seem to move in patterns too deliberate to be chance. Hunters tell stories, though always in low voices, and only when the fire is bright. They say the forest watches. That it chooses. One old man once admitted that he left bread and salt at the tree line every time he entered, as if he were knocking on the door of something that lived inside. If you forget, he said, the forest remembers. There are stories of disappearances, far too many to dismiss. One winter, 3 brothers went in with 5 dogs. The dogs were found days later, circling a camp where food and rifles lay untouched. But the brothers were gone. Their tracks ended in a clearing, not scattered, not lost, just gone, as if they had stepped into the air itself. On the trees around that clearing were claw marks, higher than any bear could reach. Others tell of footsteps in fresh snow, the kind that follow a man but never overtake him. One traveler swore that he heard breathing behind him for hours, steady and slow, and when he turned, there were no eyes, only the impression of weight in the air, as though the night itself leaned close. The worst stories are the ones about the call. Dogs hear it first. They whine, they dig, they howl in a way that makes the hair on your arms rise. And then they run, not away, but deeper into the trees, as if something is pulling them. More than one hunter has chased after his hound, only to find nothing but an empty collar in the snow, and strange marks like long, human hands pressed into the drifts. They say the forest is a living creature. It hears, it feels, it waits. But there are places where even the most seasoned hunters tread carefully, as if visiting a predator that knows how to smile. In the north, where the air smells of resin and pine, where winters are long and nights are so thick it feels like light itself is just a mistake, there lies a forest spoken of only in whispers around campfires. They call it the Black Herman. No one knows where that name came from, as if the forest named itself. It's a harsh, almost cursed land. Hundreds of kilometers of taiga, swamps tangled with spruce, narrow clearings choked by trees, and streams winding through moss like cold snakes. Such wild places are terrifying and dangerous. By day, it looks majestic, towering trunks, steam rising above rivers, animal tracks in loose snow. But at night, this forest seems to exhale warmth and let in something that should never belong to this earth. And those who have spent even one night there all tell the same story. You wake up in the dead of night and feel a gaze. Someone's gaze. You see no one, but you know it's there, close. This story began like an ordinary hunt. Three men: Pyotr, an old hunter who knew the woods better than his own house; Rem, his city-bred nephew eager to prove he was as tough as the old-timers; and Sly, Pyotr's acquaintance, a sturdy man with cautious eyes. They were joined by two dogs, Boka and Lacey, both well-trained, sharp, with a sense humans can only envy. They came for moose. In these parts, a moose isn't just a trophy, it's a test. But the hunt went badly. Snow had been falling for 3 days straight, and the beasts seemed to vanish. Only tracks. Old ones, already covered by fresh snow. Pyotr frowned and muttered to himself, as if the forest was hiding something. For a while, they wandered in vain, unable to find their prey. They slept in a small log cabin deep in the woods, joking with each other, cooking over the fire, sipping tea in the evening. But on the third night, when they lit the fire, something strange began. Boka, usually calm, growled low and stared into the darkness. Lacey pressed against the wall, tail tucked, too scared to move. Rem laughed, saying, "If you're afraid of wolves, don't go into the forest." But Pyotr, the old hunter, didn't smile. He just said quietly that maybe they shouldn't have come here at all. People trust dogs more than people. Especially hunters. For them, dogs are not just helpers, they're friends, brothers in blood, companions in the deep wilderness, where one wrong move is all it takes to go from the warmth of the fire to the cold of death. But there are forests that test loyalty in other ways. In those places, even the best dogs become shadows of themselves. This story brings together several chilling incidents that happened in different parts of the North and East. Incidents whispered by old men as they pour another drink, when the night is deaf and the wind moans outside the window. And every time, these stories carry the names of dogs. Because they were the first to understand that the forest does not like strangers. Boka was no ordinary dog. He was a gray-red Laika, large, with intelligent eyes. Pyotr, the old hunter, used to say that Boka could smell an elk from 5 versts away. With Boka, they weren't afraid to go into the deepest forest. And then there was Sly, Pyotr's friend, who had a dog named Lacey, a white Laika, light and fast as the wind. He hunted sable with her, lived alone, and Lacey was the smartest dog you could imagine, understanding everything at half a word. But in December, something happened that Sly would never forget. They were staying at a winter cabin, a snowstorm was raging outside. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, Lacey howled, a thin, mournful sound, as if she had seen death itself. Sly grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch. Out in the darkness, something was moving through the forest. Heavy, slow steps, the snow crunching underfoot. He lifted his lantern, nothing. But the tracks on the path were strange. Like elk tracks, but long, and with claws. Lacey bolted toward the forest, and that was it. She vanished. In the morning, they found her collar on a snowdrift. Just the collar covered in blood. And next to it, tracks. Human track. Barefoot. And beyond that, a long drag mark, as if something had been pulled away. Sly left that place and never went into the forest alone again. Yes, the forest is dangerous. There are many stories from the woods. And many terrifying ones about dogs. They say there's a village in Transbaikalia where no one keeps dogs anymore. Why? Because 5 years ago, 3 men went hunting with 5 dogs. None of them ever came back. A week later, they found the campsite. People had been searching. All their belongings were untouched: the rifles, the cooking pots, even the pelts they had taken. But there were no hunters. No dogs. Only tracks circling the campsite, as if they had been running in loops. And claw marks on the trees, 3 meters high, as if made by something with talons. People whisper it wasn't an animal. Out there, there's something that calls to dogs. Because before they disappear, they always howl the same way: long, low, mournful, as if saying goodbye to their master. The old folks say there's a master of the forest. Not a beast, not a man, but a shadow that walks on long legs, taller than the spruces. They say he loves dogs. Takes them first. Maybe because they sense him before a man does. Maybe because through them he sees us. And so, if your dog suddenly sits and stares into the forest for too long, leave. Not tomorrow. Not in the morning. Now. People don't like to speak ill of the forest. Not out of cowardice, just because they knew that every unnecessary word out there was like calling something out of the darkness. In winter, the forest became especially dangerous. Frost creaked under boots, branches snapped like dry bones, and it felt like something was moving under the snow. The old folks whispered that the forest was alive. That it takes those who dare to walk it after suns. But there are always the brave ones. One winter, when the frost had set in and the rivers were sealed under glass, 2 men in the village, Alex and Dean, set out to hunt. They were seasoned men, not the fearful type. Their dogs were just as fearless. Alex had Tumen, a massive dog with fur as gray as morning frost and eyes like steel. Dean had Melu, a Laika, not as big, but clever, quick, and bold. They were after moose. At dawn, they found a fresh track, but the animals seemed to be leading them in circles. By noon, the snow was falling in heavy flakes, and a mist began to rise, a strange thing in such cold. The forest grew heavy with silence, sounds muffled as if under a blanket. The dogs sensed it first. Tumen raised the fur along his neck, growling low into the thicket. Melu, usually playful, lowered his tail but stubbornly stayed close. The men exchanged glances but said nothing, pressing on as if driven by some unseen force. By evening, the trail led them into the old part of the forest, where spruces stood like pillars and the sky barely peeked through. The snow was untouched except for deep holes, moose tracks. Then suddenly, the trail ended. Clean. Wiped away, as if erased. The dogs broke free of their leashes, bolting in opposite directions. At first, there was barking, loud, fierce. Then silence. Only the echo between the trees. Alex noticed Fur's Melu didn't come back. He whistled, called, nothing. Empty. Somewhere far off, a faint crack. The men moved toward the sound, slowly, cautiously. And stumbled on tracks. Many tracks. Not animal. Human. No, the prints had long fingers, as if hands had clawed into the snow. And their Melu's collar. Whole, without blood, but removed, neatly. Tumen suddenly howled low, drawn out, so chilling that the frost felt even sharper. He was staring into the thicket, where the mist thickened like smoke from a fire. Alex raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking. And then, something stepped out of the mist. At first, it looked like a moose. A huge silhouette, branching antlers. But the steps weren't animal. They were human. It came closer, and the men understood, it wasn't a moose. Yes, there were antlers. But the body was stretched, thin, gray like bark. The face no eyes. Where eyes should be, there were only two black hollows, steaming faintly. Tumen growled and lunged forward. The men shouted, but the dog vanished into the white shroud. A second later, silence. Then a distant crack of a branch. And then came the sound of chewing. Wet. Slow. Like something gnawing meat. Dean broke first, bolting. Alex followed. They ran blind, branches whipping their faces, breath tearing their throats. By some miracle, they stumbled upon an old hunting cabin. They dove inside, slammed the door, threw the bolt. Outside, silence. Just the wind, and the creak of snow. Then, scratching on the wall. Soft at first, then harder. Like claws. Alex gripped the rifle so tightly his knuckles went white. Dean prayed in a whisper, voice cracking into a scream. They barely made it to dawn. And when daylight came, the mist outside glowed like milk, and in it moved shadows, long, thin, bent shapes, as if crawling on all fours. They survived the night. But when they stepped outside, they couldn't believe their eyes. The snow was black with soot, and around the cabin, no tracks at all. Only far off, on a white field, lay a collar. And next to it, prints. Sometimes, at night in the village, people still hear dogs barking. But not normal barking, muffled, as if from underground. Since then, no one goes into that forest. And if the mist rises, the village bolts the doors tight and douses the lights. Just in case. After all, there are stories. Dark ones. But there are also forest stories with a wonderful ending. This is where I can tell you about an incredible dog named Jack and his owner. Herman had loved the forest since childhood. For him, the dense thicket, the interwoven branches, the smell of pine and damp earth were not just scenery, they were a world where he felt free. His friends had long settled in cities, some with families, some with jobs, but Herman remained faithful to the taiga and to hunting. He believed the noise of the metropolis was a cage, and the forest, the breath of life. He was one of those people who are not afraid of loneliness, on the contrary, they find strength in it. That November day, snow began falling during the night. At first tiny, sparse flakes, like ash, but by morning it was coming down in heavy clusters. The sky turned low and dull, gray like stretched fabric. The forest seemed endless, and every sound was muffled by the snow. Herman threw on a warm jacket, adjusted his hat, and checked his rifle. Beside him spun Jack, his loyal companion and best friend. Jack was a husky, but it was as if the spirit of a wolf lived in him. Thick gray fur, amber eyes, sharp and intelligent. He wasn't just a dog, he was a companion, a partner, a savior from loneliness on long winter nights. That day promised luck. Tracks on the fresh snow led to a large clearing where moose often appeared. Herman walked confidently, leaving behind a chain of footprints. Jack would dart ahead, then return, making sure his master wasn't lost. The wind was picking up, but the hunter was used to the taiga's moods. He even whistled a cheerful tune. Until something happened that changed everything. It happened in an instant. Herman stepped onto what looked like solid ground, but the snow hid the danger. The crust cracked beneath his foot, and he plunged downward. A hidden pit, a deep hollow, almost a snow-covered trap. He hit the frozen ground hard, and there was a sickening crack. Pain shot through his leg so sharply that his vision went black. He tried to move his foot, but the pain was unbearable. His ankle was clearly broken. Snow slowly began to fill the hollow he had fallen into. Herman realized there was no way out on his own. All around were trees, snow, and cold creeping under his clothes. The village was 10 kilometers away through the forest, and he could barely stand. No phone. And then Jack appeared beside him. The dog leapt into the pit, licking his master's hands, whining, tugging at his sleeve. In those amber eyes there was despair and understanding. Herman clenched his teeth and pointed Jack toward the nearest village. As if he understood every word, the dog froze for a second, locked eyes with him, and then bolted. He understood. He ran. Jack ran like never before. Snow lashed his muzzle, his paws sank in drifts, he stumbled, but he never stopped. Every second was the price of Herman's life. He remembered the smell of smoke, he remembered the road to the village. He had to make it in time. First, he crossed a forest ravine, then raced up a ridge, tearing past black, bare trees. The forest seemed alive, the shadows moved, the wind howled like laughter at his desperate attempt. But Jack would not give up. Half an hour later, lights flickered ahead. The village. His strength was nearly gone, but he surged forward. Bursting onto the street, Jack barked so fiercely that every dog in the area raised its hackles. Men came out of houses, some with lanterns, some even with pitchforks. At first, they tried to chase him off, maybe he was just a stray dog. They didn't know Jack. But Jack wouldn't leave. He grabbed at their coats, leapt on them, ran back toward the forest, looking over his shoulder, barking, calling them to follow. An old man cursed at him. But when Jack literally knocked him into the snow and then ran toward the forest again, the men understood something was wrong. They gathered 3 men, grabbed lanterns, ropes, sleds. Jack pulled ahead, glancing back every few meters to make sure they were following. And the men went after him, into the dark forest, where the wind wailed as if ghosts were wandering there. They found Herman an hour later. He lay in the hollow, covered with snow, his face pale, his breathing faint. A little longer, and he would have frozen to death. The men climbed down carefully, lifted him out, and laid him on the sled. Herman barely opened his eyes, looked at Jack, and whispered, "Good boy, you saved me." The dog sat beside him on the sled, pressing close, as if afraid to let go even for a moment. Herman survived. He had surgery and spent a long time healing his leg. And through it all, Jack never left his side. In the village, they talked about this for years. They told the story of how the dog called for help and pulled people to the forest. Herman became a different man. He still loved the forest, but hunting was no longer about trophies. Now he went there to listen to the silence and thank fate. And Jack? He remained a hero. When Herman died many years later, someone saw a dog at his grave, old, gray, but still just as loyal. They say he lay there until his very last day, guarding his man even after death.